Adarai up in this piece, coming at you live with another Ein story. So, situation is this. Ein, Cambion from Sigil, dad who's a halfling, mother who's a Merilith. Found a moonblade, well, stole a moonblade. Then he went to his dad, figured out it was in fact a moonblade. Then his dad asked him to give it to an elf, yeah, as one does. Then the dude he stole it from wanted it back, because who the fuck wouldn't? And now, fuck it, he's going back to kill the dude that he stole it from. I guess we all caught up. With that in mind, let's get this party started with a little tale called Deaf Dealer's Delight by Montsho Shelby. Part 1, A Kill in the Hand is Worth. When you tell an elven vengeance god you're gonna kill someone, it went without saying that you got the job done. He had intended to kill Nalizabat all along, but it was Don Grievers and Elohim that convinced him that robbing him would be a better use of his time. In Ein's experiences, it was better to be underpaid with a kill in hand than overpaid with a batizu on your back, because you would use every coin you pilfered to hide from their influence. He had killed 2 Cornagons a few weeks back with a high-up elf that was on the run from devils, but this was an entirely different can of worms. He intended to enter Nalizabat's citadel and kill him in full view of his entire court. He was a Cornagon of great repute, and in time he may soon transform into a greater fiend, possibly Pit, and that was an even better reason to ensure that Ein killed him before that happened. Ein and his friends had broken into his treasure hold and stolen a great deal, but things went sour and their identities were compromised, and Ein was the one that took the brunt of that blow. In that mound of sparkling gems and wonders of mortal men, there lay a sword of great beauty. Its naked blade gleamed like the smooth silky curves of a female, and the etched runes hissed with the power of a beast. Ein touched the blade and it nearly burned him to death. It told him through pain that he was not its master. He knew in his heart that that blade was meant for someone, and it was someone's right. He knew this. To leave this blade in the hands of the devil Nalizabat would have been a sin in and of itself, so he claimed it, this moonblade. And now, after he returned the blade, the power of Shevarash gave him his blessing to kill the one that killed its owner. Since Nalizabat was putting the force of the Batizu army on him, he didn't need his blessing, he would have done it anyway. But with a power putting forth an approving nod, it was better than having nothing at all. Ein was breaking his father's first rule of breaking and entering, and that was to never go it alone. But he had no choice in the matter. Now the devils were only asking around, places he knew, people, but how long would it be before they asked without words? A fiend had much more useful ways of making people talk, and words were not by any means high on that list. Nalizabat should have been killed when he first had the chance, but that was a mistake he didn't plan to repeat. Ein rifled through swords and devices of death with an unwavering eye. He knew what was worth his time and what was not. Palos stood over to the side and tinkered with metal contraptions. Ein geared up in his shop and suited up. Palos was a dustman, and even though the factions went underground, his heart was still unchanged. Ein worked with Palos almost exclusively. There wasn't an item that he possessed that Palos hadn't manipulated in some way. He believed in finding the meaning of true death, and with his weapons he became an expert in spreading his message. He always draped himself in the skin of Batizu, the cape, the leathery wings of a pit fiend, and the cowl, the gnarled death grimace of a Cornagon. Crisscrossing his body was metal spines with devices whose nature was a mystery to discern. Ein just knew how useful the spine he wore was, and imagined the power that a few more may provide. "You know that you're going to die," Palos said casually. Ein smiled rakishly. "Then maybe you should come with me." Ein came back. Palos pulled one of the levers on the wall and a hidden door swung open. The shopkeeper jumped nervously when the gear snapped into place. "I got what you wanted, but why do you need 5 tankards of holy water when it takes you 6 months to go through one?" Palos spoke with a bit of an unsure quiver in his voice. Well, demand calls for it, Ein smiled. Part 2. Wishy-washy. It is easier to wipe fear from your mind than doubt. When the fear is gone, you will find that the doubt is all you fear. Quote from an anonymous planer. It was ironic that Ein armed himself to the teeth and had no intentions on fighting. In his line of work, getting yourself entangled in a battle meant you had failed in your objective. He took his time reading the arcane enchantments that ran down the face of a long scroll. The demon in him gave him magic as one may have been given sight, but the complexities of wizardry was work to him. He finally released the burst of energy with the words of the alien language of the arcane, and the spell washed over him. The contingency he cast would last for a few days, and it may save his life. Some of the more difficult spells took him a long time to read through, but he rarely turned to a scroll in the heat of battle. It was time to do what he had to do, and he had to kill Nelizabat before he killed him, or worse, kill someone he cared about. The half-demon assassin looked down at the portal to Malgard, which doubled as a sewer hole when not in use. He took a deep breath, opened the portal, then jumped in. The demon realm of Bator had many faces, and the lair of Malgar was its best by far, but the taint of hell was an easy smell to recognize. There was an eerie perfection in everything in this place. Buildings lined up flawlessly. There was an awkward uniformity to everything. Fiends walked the paved streets with absolute impunity, and most regarded Ein with a curious eye. It wasn't as if the devils here had not seen a half-breed before. It was just that he wasn't the right half. Hopefully, there wouldn't be any that would be able to easily recognize. The half-breed wrapped himself in a brown cloak and stood at an unintimidating 5'2". He tried to make himself as unimportant as he could because fiends preyed on the weak, not the boring. Nelizabat's fortress was a white stone structure of pure perfection. The size alone was so awe-inspiring that Ein felt the weight of cold death creep into his heart. The assassin nearly turned back at the sight of the massive structure. He began to doubt himself. He began to think that it was a horrible idea to have come alone. He took a half step behind him and thought back to the devils that came into his father's bar asking questions and how they found him. Then he began to see the ones he loved crucified and beaten, praying for death that was long to come, burning slowly in a layer of hell. And that thought alone took any doubt that he had and replaced it with a burning determination. He could not fail, and he would not fail, no matter if the entire Batizu army was inside. 2 bearded devils barred the gate. He hoped he had enough to bribe them both. They stood parallel to each other. Their armor gleamed without flaw, and their height matched impeccably. An intentional occurrence. Ein walked over confidently. The devil's gazes locked on him defiantly. They towered over the little half-breed by an entire body length. But the oversized pillars they stood next to made them look just as insignificant. The assassin's eyes nonchalantly swept up and down the sentinels, along with the outside perimeter defenses. They were good, to put it lightly. And doubts shivered up the back of his neck to make themselves comfortable with the fear that was already there. "What?" the Batizu asked harshly. "I came to see the master." "Who are you?" the other one asked. "Elzik, merchant of tales," Ein said without the slightest shake of cowardice in his voice. "A bard? Then why don't you tell me a story that ends with gold in my hand?" one said, while leaning a bit on his oversized glaive. "As you wish," Ein said while pulling at his coin pouch. The devil looked at the coins in hand with an approving nod. "You tell good stories, Elzik, but my friend didn't hear it." "Very well." Ein noticed the second bearded devil scratching his jaggedly sharp beard in thought, and furrowing his brow in concentration. Ein wondered if he knew. He wondered if he'd have to kill them both. Now, "I remember you," the other bearded devil declared. Ein tensed. "You're... Damn, I don't recollect." he said with disappointment. I played for Yuga on the River Styx. Could that have been what you remembered? Ein said, trying to be helpful, but not very. Nah, it was someone else. Get going. I hope you're good. Elizabeth killed 2 of the last 7 bards we had. The fiend spoke. I'll do fine, Ein said as he walked into the oversized pillars. The half-demon assassin exhaled. Ein explored the palace. He bribed who he couldn't lie to. He checked everywhere except the throne room and extremely warded areas. He put ordinary rope tricks in strategic places. The Cambion smirked slightly. He tapped his arcane abilities and began to shape the stone on the ceiling. As soon as the hefty block began to tumble and create a boom to bring the entire court, Ein used his will to levitate it. He pushed the stone, and the extra-dimensional space of the rope trick swelled to fit the huge block, then disappeared into nothingness. The clever rogue set these blocks up all over the palace. It was only a matter of time before these fiends noticed even the slightest imperfection. Not to mention all the devils with powers of true sight. If even a few of these traps were still set by the time he came out, he would be happy. The assassin tested his dimension door, and it was locked as he expected. He would do things the hard way. He reached for his scrolls that he broke the bank to acquire and began to chant. Part 3. What are friends for? This was the moment that was destined to come. It was the time to kill Elizabeth. Ein had enchantment surging through his body. If any were detecting magic on him, he'd glow bright enough to blind their eyes. He had a minute at best before someone got wise to his intentions, so as soon as he entered, he would have to form his plan in the course of a few breaths. The last spell he put on himself was the spell that he always liked to save for last. His protection from evil. In his mind, it was a test. A test on him to see if he had finally stepped over the edge and became the murderer that the world was so sure he would be. He feared that one day it may not work on him. The huge doors of Elizabeth's court was open and 4 bearded devils stood parallel to each other. They watched a Fire Genasi tumbling troupe do their display and had very little interest in a sawed-off runt of a half-breed. Ein surveyed the court with a quick yet casual eye. Elizabeth sat on his throne in a state of mild amusement. He was nearly as big as a prime world giant. His scales were a dark brown that was nearly black. Elizabeth's teeth were so jagged and thick it cut into his own lips. The greater fiend's maul rested at his side. A weapon so big I didn't think he would be able to even pick it up if he tried. Flanking the awesome demon lord were 2 Gulagons. They stood 12 feet each, with cold glares, insect-like heavy shells, clawed hands that gripped spears with an urgent vigilance, and sharp mandibles chewed instinctively like a roach. There were devils sprinkled in a standing crowd. Pillars lined the courtyard's rims. Their shadows were deep and ominous. Creatures of the dark lurked there. At the foot of Elizabeth's throne was Zuel. Zuel, he thought to himself. She was chained to the foot of the devil's throne. Zuel had served with Ein in the Blood Wars. She was a succubus, a good scout, and as beautiful as a flower in full bloom. Ein turned his head away from this sight. He couldn't let her see him. She was a demon, a full demon. She deserved this wicked life that she now found herself a part of. Ein couldn't believe that. He fought side by side with her. She wasn't a part of his new life, but a ghost of his past. She was unredeemable. No, he couldn't let himself believe that. Or maybe she was. What did it matter? Zuel was a friend. He couldn't leave her here, even if she wasn't the most virtuous creature in the multiverse. She was his friend, and what man left his friends to die? Ein focused. He was going to attempt to stab Elizabeth to death, but in looking at his sheer size, he didn't think he'd die from any tiny weapon that he carried. If the devil was wounded and didn't die, he was sure he could teleport from his own fortress, even though dimensional travel was blocked for anyone else. So he had to goad him. He had to convince him to follow him. He had to humiliate the brute. And that would be the only way to ensure that he personally stayed to battle him. And even then, he'd not be able to fight the entire court. This would be a running battle. Well, I knew he'd be running either way. Ein looked to Zuel and began to focus his mind. Zuel, it's Ein, the clever half-breed assassin thought through the silent voice of his mind. The succubus, a master of subterfuge, heard Ein's mental voice loud and clear, but made no outward reaction in her body. Are you gonna help me? Zuel said with her mind. That and kill Elizabeth, Ein thought. How? Zuel asked curiously. I need to anger him. Anger him? And then what? I couldn't tell you. I just need to make sure he doesn't teleport out. You're gonna have his entire army on you, and there is no dimensional travel for you, lover. I'm gonna make it out to one of the 5 portals I scoped out to the abyss. He's not following me there. On foot, Ein? Yes. And you think you can make it there? I'm gonna have to. Just get ready, Ein said while taking off one of the potions that he liked to save for escape emergencies. The assassin waited for one of the tumbling genassis to move his way. He put on a metal mask which mirrored the visage of a smooth-faced elf. He laid the potion on the floor. A tumbler with vibrant red skin and vibrant, flowing red clothes tumbled near Ein. The assassin saw his chance. He tumbled into the courtyard perfectly. His armor moved with him as intuitively as if it were a limb on his body. Ein flipped head over foot, and stopped in front of Elizabeth. In the maelstrom of motion, the assassin's unseen servant discreetly floated his potion of gaseous form to the waiting succubus. She palmed it without hesitation. Ein wasted no time and shot forth a great green streak of energy that washed over the devil's massive frame. His magic would anchor him to this plane, but if he didn't die, it would be all for naught. Thank you for the moonblade, Elizabeth. Ein thought roguishly directly into the fiend's mind. Elizabeth stood with rage harder than dragon's breath. He grabbed his maul in a rehearsed motion. The devil didn't even think, because the thought of someone stealing what he had killed to possess blinded him with an almost tangible fury. If the onlookers had not been aware of the outburst that had just happened, they now knew that Ein ran through the tumblers with an unnatural speed. The devil hurled his maul with the strength of a titan, and it twirled through the air almost peacefully until it thunderously collided with an unlucky genasi tumbler that hadn't yet noticed the commotion and continued his routine. The weapon boomed when it struck, leaving an imprint in the unfortunate creature's chest. As soon as the maul claimed its victim, it reversed its flight pattern and spun back to Elizabeth's waiting hand. Ein kept running, making sure that Elizabeth was following him. The bearded devils guarding the entry braced their glaives for the half-breed charging their way. Ein smirked and set his feet. He dove in the air and flipped clear over the 8-foot barricades. He continued on, tearing through the palace, running towards his best possible escape route. Part 4. Dark Wet Spot. The bearded devils were on his tail with Elizabeth and his Gulagan henchmen trailing the pack. But there was an ability that Ein possessed that the fiends could not have planned for. He was one of a handful of creatures that he knew of that could cast spells while they were running. He called to his demonic abilities, focused his powers, and brought a grease spell to his hand. The bearded devil slid on the ground, bouncing this way and that on the walls of the corridor. Elizabeth and his bodyguards saw the trap, and though the hallway was a bit cramped for a full-blown fight, they used their momentum to glide in the air. When they felt they were clear of the spell's effect, they hit the ground running. Ein thought to cast another, but the sheer concentration it took to produce a spell on the move gave him a great chance of botching it. Random bearded devils picked up pursuit, but the assassin dare not stop moving when he was so close to the first surprise. As soon as Elizabeth and his minions ran into a point where the corridor narrowed, Ein dismissed his rope trick. From nothingness, a huge stone block fell from the air. Nalizabat rolled back, but his lieutenants were not as lucky. One was crushed outright, while the other's legs were smashed and useless. Nalizabat took 2 earth-rattling swings from his maul and broke the block into 4 big chunks. In the distance, he saw the thief running to escape. There would be no escape for him, and nowhere for him to hide. Nalizabat kept up with Ein, taking 1 step for every 4 Ein took. Ein tossed the dagger into Nalizabat's neck. The fiend felt the poison sting of holy water course through his veins and the ebbing of his black blood, but that didn't stop him from charging into battle. Ein rolled and evaded, barely missing death with each blow. Nalizabat brandished a whip in his offhand and held the immense maul freely in his good hand. The assassin threw a handful of marble-sized barrels at the raging fiend. Nalizabat smiled. "Throwing stones, boy," the devil yelled as he nearly collapsed a wall from a missed blow. Then the whip stroke fell, the dreaded whip stroke, and Ein rattled with pain so immense his body convulsed, and he couldn't think. He was left in a stupor. And that's when his contingency sparked to life. The dormant enchantment of a scroll from hours before came into effect. As the devil's hammer came overhead, Ein's body phased out, and the maul passed through the road and smashed the stone ground. Ein shook off the stunning whip blow and smirked. He had not chosen this spot by chance. He dismissed the rope trick hanging over Nalizabat's head. The devil looked up, and as soon as death came to claim him, the brute of a devil caught the massive block on his shoulders. Nalizabat looked to Ein with a devilish smirk that took full advantage of how many teeth busted out of his mouth. He reared back as if to throw the block, but as he tried, Ein called to his demonic gifts and shaped the massive stone that the devil held in his hands. A domed cage wrapped around Nalizabat. The greater devil's sight began to shift into dark vision, and the tiny marble-sized barrels that Ein tossed at him expanded to their true size. They were tankards. Clear liquid poured out of the tankard, shooting wildly as if through a hose. Nalizabat had very little room to swing his maul, but he reared back to do so, until the holy water from the tankards began to melt the bones from his body like acid. He hit the domed prison once and cracked a fist-sized dent in the unforgiving stone. The devil saw Ein on the other side. The little half-breed shaped the stone back into place, and the darkness returned. Nalizabat could feel the life leaving his body, and the devil called to his power to teleport. But Ein's dimensional anchor held strong. The acidic holy water sapped the devil's strength until he fell. The water cleansed his unholy bones to a bleached white. Ein felt a calm. There was no struggle from the other side. He shaped an eye hole in the cage of stone, and there lay nothing but bones. Ein breathed easy and turned to run, only to find Nalizabat's broken leg cohorts lunging at him. The assassin spun and flung a dagger in the weakened creature's right eye. It sizzled with the poison of holy water coursing through its veins. Ein didn't even wait for the body to drop. His unseen servant tossed his dagger to his hand, and he ran down the corridor. Ein ran through the palace with a weight off of his shoulder. The little assassin knew that he was not going to steal from fiends he didn't plan to kill first, ever again. He'd leave that to the rest of his family. He had done what had needed to be done. He would go to the abyss, then hop a portal back to Sigil. His family and friends would be safe, Chevroche would be pleased if he cared, and he would get some rest. The end. I hope you liked this little ditty because Adorai God of the game sure did. That's a wrap for Ein, unless we get like some popular demand to bring him back or something. Well, my writer, he is a font of creative juices. This guy can write anything. Though he's an infinite font, he is still a stream, not an ocean, so it takes time. Anyway, fuck these analogies. Hope you liked it. I gotta get out of here. I'm about to play Golf on the Moon with Chris Tucker and Aquaman. Peace out.